Part 1. The Cursed Door. The cold stone of Castel Gandolfo's ancient corridors seemed to shiver under the touch of the night. Pope Francis walked slowly, his steps echoing in the vast emptiness. Before him stood a door, old, forgotten, and sealed with chains tarnished by centuries of dust. It was not on any official Vatican records. Its existence was whispered only among the oldest monks, passed down like a secret curse. They warned me not to come here, Francis thought, his hand hovering over the door's rusted surface. Brother Alessandro, the senior caretaker of the castle, appeared behind him, breathless, his face pale. "Your Holiness, please," he whispered. "That door was sealed during the Black Plague. The records say it contains something not meant for this world." Francis turned his gaze upon him, calm but firm. "Faith, my son, is the greatest shield. What has been locked in fear must be faced with courage." Despite the protests, despite the trembling warnings, Pope Francis grasped the heavy latch. It groaned under his touch, a sound like the sigh of something ancient and malevolent. He pushed. The door opened just a sliver. Enough. A foul wind burst forth, carrying with it the smell of decay, rot, and something else, something not of this world. In that moment, the castle seemed to sigh, as if relieved or mourning. Francis pulled back, heart pounding. Nothing happened, he told himself. But deep beneath the castle, something woke. That night, the monks heard whispers slithering along the corridors. Cold spots formed in rooms that had once been warm. Statues of saints seemed to weep black tears. And in his private chamber, Francis found an ancient parchment slipped under his door. It bore no words, only a crude drawing of the door, split open, and a black void pouring forth. Still, the Pope, steadfast in his faith, dismissed it as fear playing tricks on tired minds. He would soon learn he was wrong. Part 2. The omen grows stronger. The morning sun did little to banish the heavy dread that clung to the castle. Pope Francis stood silently in the corridor, his eyes tracing the spiral of thorns etched faintly into the stone, marks he was certain had not been there the night before. It seemed almost to pulse under his gaze, like a wound refusing to heal. Brother Alessandro approached cautiously, a brass censer in his hand spilling thick, sweet-smelling smoke into the hallway. His face, normally serene, was tight with barely contained fear. "We must reseal the door," Alessandro said urgently. "Before nightfall." Francis nodded, but deep within, he knew that sealing the door would be like trying to hold back a flood with a handful of twigs. Throughout the day, strange occurrences multiplied. Monks spoke of vivid nightmares, waking up gasping, screaming about wings in the walls and teeth in the light. Ancient tapestries depicting biblical scenes blackened overnight. The serene faces of saints twisted into grotesque mockeries of pain and rage. The holy water near the cursed door boiled as if it were a pot over a roaring fire. By mid-afternoon, a desperate decision was made. The door must be resealed using an ancient rite known only to the Vatican's darkest archives, a ritual not performed in over 400 years. The preparations began in silence, broken only by the muttered prayers of terrified monks. Candles were placed in a perfect circle. Sacred relics, bones of martyrs, splinters of the true cross, were arrayed around the door. The Codex Maledictum, written in a forgotten tongue of blood and sorrow, was opened. As the monks began chanting, the castle itself seemed to react. A deep, rumbling growl emanated from the foundations, low and dreadful, like the first murmur of an oncoming storm. The stone beneath their feet shuddered. Francis led the prayer, his voice unwavering, despite the tremors and the cold sweat dripping down his spine. He lifted a massive crucifix, a relic of Saint Michael himself, over the door, intoning sacred words meant to banish evil. And then, a roar shattered the solemn chanting. The chains across the door rattled violently. From behind it, a force pushed, hard, straining against centuries of holy bindings. Strengthen the chains. Brother Alessandro shouted, but it was too late. With a deafening bang, the door burst open, and from the darkness poured a thick, choking mass of shadows, alive, writhing, hungry. At the center of the shadows stood a figure, half-formed, skeletal, its hollow eyes burning with a hatred older than humanity itself. "You cannot bind me again," it hissed, its voice layered with 1,000 tones of suffering. "Your faith is but ash against the winds of time." The monks scattered, some screaming, some frozen in paralyzed terror. Francis alone stood firm. He thrust the crucifix forward, his voice rising over the chaos. "Begone! In the name of Christ, return to the abyss from whence you came." The creature shrieked, recoiling as if struck, but only momentarily. It advanced again, more cautiously this time. Francis fell to his knees, praying with every ounce of strength in his soul. Then, salvation came from the unlikeliest of sources. From deep within the castle, somewhere forgotten by time, a bell tolled, old, rusted, barely functional. It was the bell of St. Michael, forged to ring only at the end of days. The sound hit the creature like a hammer. It froze, trembling, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. From the cracks in the castle walls burst forth a blinding, searing light, pure, holy, unstoppable. The darkness screamed, thrashing against the inevitable. Piece by piece, it was torn apart, burned away by the light, until nothing remained but scorched stone and the heavy scent of brimstone. The monks slowly gathered, dazed and weeping. Francis collapsed, exhausted beyond measure. "It is not over," he rasped. This was but the beginning. Far below the castle, deeper than any catacomb, something else stirred in the forgotten dark. Something older. Something worse. And it was waking up. Part 3, the final confrontation. The bells of St. Michael had fallen silent, but the echoes of their toll seemed to throb in the very stones of Castel Gandolfo. The monks whispered prayers under their breath, their voices trembling like candles in a storm. Pope Francis, though exhausted and battered by the previous night's battle, knew deep inside, the true nightmare was only beginning. The sky outside remained locked in unnatural twilight, the sun a mere smear behind thick, roiling clouds. Shadows crept along the corridors where light should have banished them. And beneath the castle, in the catacombs abandoned for centuries, something stirred. Brother Alessandro approached, clutching a battered tome, the Codex Maledictum, written in blood by exorcists long dead. His face was pale as chalk. "Holy Father," he whispered, "the creature we banished was only a herald. The real one, it awakens below." Francis took the tome with steady hands, despite the tremors racking his body. He flipped through the brittle pages, reading the grim words that seemed to bleed darkness into the air. "When the herald is banished, the sleeper stirs. When the sleeper stirs, the world shall tremble." It was clear, they had only delayed the inevitable. A far older entity, imprisoned since the days of the Black Plague, was beginning to break free. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, the air grew so cold that frost bloomed on the marble floors. The monks gathered in the grand chapel, hastily constructing a massive barrier of salt, iron, and relics blessed by ancient popes. In the center, Pope Francis knelt in prayer, the crucifix pressed against his forehead. From deep within the earth came the first rumblings, low, sonorous, like the growl of a mountain before it collapses. And then, with a deafening roar, the stone floor before the altar cracked open. From the chasm rose a figure, colossal, hideous, wrapped in chains that smoldered with ancient fire. Its face was a mask of agony and hatred, its voice a cacophony of 1,000 damned souls screaming in unison. "I am hunger," it said, each word shaking the very heavens. The monks recoiled in terror. Some fled, their faith crumbling. Some collapsed into mindless weeping. But Francis stood, frail yet unbroken, facing the abyss. He lifted the crucifix and spoke, his voice a whisper against the hurricane. "You are not welcome here." The creature laughed, a sound like bones breaking. "You are dust," it spat. "You are fleeting. Your prayers are feathers in the storm. You cannot stop what was born before your God even dreamt." The ground cracked further as the sleeper's vast form heaved itself fully into the chapel. Statues of saints wept tears of blood. The relics began to corrode in its presence. Francis took a trembling step forward. He remembered the Codex's final warning. Faith alone will not be enough.